Howdy, it's Kyle talking about San Francisco. It's one of the most recognizable and iconic cities in the country, but it's one that many Americans don't know that much about. So in this video, I'm going to be going over various aspects of the geography of the city. I'll be talking about the urban structure, neighborhood layout, and walkability. I'll be going over economic indicators to include industries that drive the economy, companies headquartered in the city, and that really high cost of living. And I'll also be going over various aspects of the culture to include the music and food. So if you're interested in learning more about the city by the bay, this is the video for you. San Francisco sits along the Pacific coast of California and is the anchor city for the largest metro area in the northern half of the state. At the 2020 census, the population was 874,000 people, which makes it the 17th largest city in the country. That's up from 805,000 at the 2010 census. The census reported a slight population decrease in the year 2020, but a 0.1% population growth in 2021. But whether the population is slightly going up or down, the overall growth is fairly flat. The city and county of San Francisco is one singular jurisdiction, and it's one of 9 counties in the San Francisco Bay Area. The combined metro population for the overall Bay Area is about 8.5 million people, which ranks it 6th in the U.S. I don't normally get into the demographics of cities, but I do think for San Francisco it is interesting to note. The city has a minority-majority population, with over 1/3 of the population there being Asian. There's a very large Chinese community in the city, but there's also decent numbers of Vietnamese, Filipino, and other Asian groups. The city is 16% Hispanic, mostly of Mexican origin, which is well below the California average. And just from walking around the city, you really get a strong feeling for the racial and ethnic diversity that you find there. The city has a fairly low violent crime rate compared to other big cities, although it is known for having high property crimes. So you'll get your car broken into, but you won't get stabbed. The median household income is $124,000 per year, but the median house value is over $1 million. So wages are well above average, but housing costs are also really high. So I'm going to give you an idea of what some of the housing costs in San Francisco. Here's a really small studio apartment going for $333. And this is actually really inexpensive for San Francisco, but in order to be qualified for this, you have to make less than $100,000 per year and be a first-time home buyer. And here's a typical market rate apartment for the city. $525 for a 1-bedroom. So it's a nice place, but it's pretty small for the money. If you want to go up to 2-bedroom or over 1,000 square feet, it's going to cost you at least $700. And this particular one needs a lot of work. If you want to go to a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house in the city, well, it's going to cost you over $1 million. I mean, it's a nice place, it's a nice part of town, but wow, that's expensive. So housing there is very expensive, and oftentimes people will ask, why would anybody pay that much to live there? I think it comes down to 2 main things. One, the types of people that want to live there don't care about big space, big houses, big yards. And 2, the types of things that San Francisco offers you can't find anywhere else in the U.S. or anywhere else in the world. So if you want what San Francisco has, you have to be there. Supply and demand dictates cost. So if somebody's not willing to pay $3,000 for a small shoebox apartment, well, somebody else will. So it ultimately comes down to the fact that 870,000 people live there, but a lot more than 870,000 people would like to live there. Now, you or I may not want to live there, but if a few million people want to live in a place that only holds 870,000, well, it's going to be really expensive. There's nowhere to grow. It's surrounded by water on 3 sides and suburbs on the 4th. They can grow vertically with taller buildings or reclaimed land from the bay, but that's it. But it's the compact nature of the city, the fact that it is surrounded by water on 3 sides and suburbs on the 4th, as to what makes the city so unique. San Francisco is very well known for being a very hilly city. There are 7 main hills in the city, but a bunch of other smaller ones. And walking around, you really feel them. And if you've never driven there before, it can be pretty daunting to be going over the crest of a high hill and to be going down before you could even see the road in front of you. And if you're like me and your car has a manual transmission, well, that adds an extra level of fun to it. But because the streets are so narrow, the city is so compact and hilly that most people walk or take public transportation to get around. And there's no city in the country that's better for walking than San Francisco. I love going there and just spending the entire day walking around. And it's also a great way to stay in shape. One thing you're not going to see in San Francisco is a lot of overweight people. Now I want to talk about some of the neighborhoods in San Francisco, and it's definitely a city of neighborhoods. And because of the topography, one neighborhood might be quite different than the one right next to it. The heart of the downtown is the financial district, and this is located in the northeastern portion of the city. And this is where you have most of the older high-rises, including the very iconic pyramid. Directly north of the financial district is North Beach, and this is the northeastern corner of the city. The south part of North Beach is Little Italy, and there's all kinds of really good Italian restaurants around there. And this is also the part of town where you have the world famous City Lights bookstore. The north end of North Beach is the Fisherman's Wharf area, and this is the prime touristy area in town. This is where you have the Pier 39, a lot of souvenir shops, as well as the Ghirardelli Square. It's all very touristy in that part of the city, and locals don't go over there too often. Also adjacent to downtown and North Beach is Chinatown. This is the oldest and largest Chinatown in the U.S., and it came to be when Chinese immigrants were kind of marginalized and segregated and forced to live in this part of the city. And to this day, there's a very strong Chinese community there. If you visit, there are two main streets through Chinatown. One is called Grant Avenue, and this is the main kind of touristy one with the big Chinese gate. But then Stockton Street next to it is a little more realistic Chinatown. So if you want to pick the fish you're going to eat while it's swimming around in a paint bucket on the street, well, that's the part of town to go to. And the areas around this part of town is where you have some of the steepest hills, with Nob Hill, Russian Hill, and Telegraph Hill all being in this portion of the city. And because of the steepness of these hills, this is the part of town where you have the cable cars. So you can imagine back in the early 20th century, it was very difficult to get a horse and carriage up these steep hills. But nowadays, they're basically just for tourists. But some of the hills are so steep, there are stairs carved into the sidewalk. And you can also get some of those optical illusion photos where you tilt your camera to the side, take a picture of a house on a hill, and makes it look like it was the house that was tilted. A lot of the high-tech stuff, tech startups, and some of the newer buildings are on the south end of downtown, called the South of Market area. And this is the part of town where you'll see the contrast between some of the beautiful new buildings and tech workers, right near where you're going to see a large number of homeless congregated. The part of town that the media always go to with their cameras is called the Tenderloin District. And this has been a downtrodden area for as long as I've been visiting the city. There's a lot of issues with homelessness and drugs. And anytime you see some of the sensationalist coverage of the homeless problem there, it's going to be in this part of town. Homelessness is definitely a major problem in the city, and it's more visible in San Francisco than most other cities. But there's nowhere that the homeless can hide in San Francisco. Most cities have empty factories or empty warehouses, abandoned homes where the homeless can congregate. But in San Francisco, real estate is so expensive that everything is being used. There are no empty warehouses or abandoned homes. So if you're homeless in the city, you got to be out there in the open. Adjacent to the Tenderloin District is the Civic Center, where you have a city hall, which also doubles as the county courthouse. It was built in the early 20th century to replace the former city hall that was destroyed in the 1906 earthquake. It's a massive building, and it looks more like a state capitol. Continuing south from the downtown area, you get to the Mission District. The district takes its name from Mission Dolores, which is located in the neighborhood. The building dates back to 1776, and the area became a part of town where many Mexicans would live. And to this day, this is the part of town that has the largest Hispanic population, although the Hispanic population is not as large as it used to be. It's one of the poorer parts of town, and historically is one of the higher crime parts of town as well. It's been largely gentrified in the past 10 to 15 years, but there still are some pretty seedy and poor back streets of the Mission District. And as you go more south and east from downtown along the Bay Shore is where you get to the poorest parts of the city. The neighborhoods in the southeasternmost portion of the city, Bayview and Hunters Point, are the two parts of town with the highest violent crime rates. And this part of the city is kind of isolated from the rest of San Francisco. There's some industrial stuff separating some of the residential areas from other parts of the city, and a big hill that separates it from the main part of the city as well. Going back up into the central part of the city, you've got the Castro District. It's usually referred to as just the Castro, but this is the most famous gayborhood in the world. The corner of Castro and 18th Street is often referred to proudly as the gayest four corners on earth. And the reason why there's such a large gay population in the city goes back to the 1940s. A lot of servicemen fighting in World War II in the Pacific Theater were dishonorably discharged after it became known they were gay, and they were sent back to San Francisco. And after a lot of the parents found out why their sons were discharged, they were disowned. So you had a large number of gay men essentially abandoned in San Francisco. So a large gay community started to grow as a result as people from all across the country, all across the world realized they can go to San Francisco and just be who they are. It's a place where misfits and outcasts could go and not be ostracized. You started to see some of these beatnik poet and writers moving there. A lot of musicians started moving there. And by the mid-1960s, San Francisco became the hotspot for American rock music. The part of town most associated with some of this counterculture is the Haight-Ashbury neighborhood. This is where many major musical acts got their start, and was a part of town most commonly discussed when talking about the Summer of Love in 1967. And Haight-Ashbury is home to some of the finest examples of those famous San Francisco Victorian homes. A little south of Haight-Ashbury is Twin Peaks. This is a park, and when you go to the top of it, has wonderful views of the city. So if you're going to visit San Francisco, definitely go to the top of Twin Peaks and check out the view. Covering most of the west central part of the city is the large Golden Gate Park. At 3 miles long, it's one of the largest urban parks in the country. And there's all kinds of stuff within the park that makes it a place you can spend an entire day at. There's the California Academy of Sciences Museum, Japanese tea garden, a lot of ball fields, walking trails through wooded areas, and it's just a nice spot to get away from some of the chaos of the city. The northwestern corner of the city is home to the Presidio. This is an old military fort that was first used in 1776. It was built by the Spanish when California was part of New Spain. It transferred over to Mexico when Mexico became independent from Spain, and then transferred to the U.S. after the Mexican Cession of 1848. However, its function as an army base stopped in 1994, and now it's a national park. But it's a popular spot for walking, biking, or picnicking, and you have beautiful views of the Golden Gate Bridge right there. And then on the Pacific side of the city is where you have Baker Beach. It's a beautiful beach with nice views of the bridge, but check out the attire of people in this video. It's often quite chilly at the beach. And there are many other neighborhoods in San Francisco. Some that are tucked away between small hills. Some are just little corners of the city, but I can't go over all of them, but there are some wonderful neighborhoods, and you see all kinds of really cool stuff just walking around the city. So now I want to discuss the economy of San Francisco. The city of San Francisco alone has a GDP of about $200 billion. To put that in perspective, the city of San Francisco has a larger GDP than 17 states, most of which have more people. And the greater San Francisco Bay Area has a GDP of almost $1 trillion. And the Bay Area's GDP is 80% of that of Florida's, with only 1/3 the population. The economy there is largely based on the high-tech sector. Much of the high-tech sector is centered around internet services, but much is also centered around automation, autonomous driving software, and artificial intelligence. It's also the primary financial hub for the western U.S., and it's also a very important city for shipping and transport. Some of the largest companies headquartered in the city include Wells Fargo Banks, Twitter, Uber, Lyft, Yelp, Craigslist, Pinterest, Fitbit, Dropbox, Salesforce, GitHub, Instacart, DoorDash, Reddit, Plaid Financial Services, Niantic Software, Levi's, Gap, Industrial Light and Magic Film Studio. There's certainly no shortage of major companies headquartered in this city, but a lot of these jobs are jobs that can be done from home. And so as a result, some companies have chosen to leave San Francisco to go to other places where it's cheaper to operate. The jobs are really easy to relocate, and oftentimes it's just moving a server. Now I'd like to briefly discuss the climate of the city. San Francisco is more or less a one-season city. The warmest month is September, where the average high is 70 degrees, and it's the only month where the average is over 70. And the coldest month is January, where the average high is 58 degrees. So whether it's January 10th or July 10th, it'll probably be about 60 degrees. And you get this little variation in temperature because the city is surrounded by cold water. There's just always a moderating effect from the ocean and bay. But the cool marine layer in the atmosphere is why you get so much fog there as well. You'll see fog forming above the water and then kind of creep its way through the Golden Gate. In terms of natural disasters, there's really only one major one they have to worry about there. There have been 2 major earthquakes in about the past 150 years, but they've both been really big. The 1906 earthquake was measured at about a 7.9 on the moment scale. Most of the city was destroyed and approximately 3,000 people were killed. The other major one was in 1989. This one was actually centered about an hour south of the city. This one measured a 6.9 on the moment scale. The earthquake caused 63 deaths, and 7 of those were in San Francisco. A large earthquake is certainly a major disaster, but they don't happen very often. With that being said, the city is definitely overdue for another large earthquake. So now I want to talk about the food. One of the most iconic foods to come out of San Francisco is sourdough bread. I don't know anything about the science of bread making, but the unique climate around San Francisco allows bread to get that kind of sour taste you get. And the city is also very well known for its clams and clam chowder. You put those two together and you get one of my favorite foods, clam chowder and a sourdough bread bowl. And there's certainly no shortage of great seafood restaurants you're going to find all throughout the city. And seafood will make its way into everything. So you go to the Italian restaurants in North Beach area, you'll get some great seafood pastas. And with a large population of immigrants from China and other parts of East and Southeast Asia, there's a lot of great Asian restaurants as well. Something else that San Francisco is known for is Ghirardelli chocolates. And if I'm making brownies, my go-to mix is Ghirardelli. And the last thing that I wanted to discuss is some of the music coming out of the city. So like I had mentioned before, back in the 1960s, there was a lot of musical acts that came out of San Francisco. And a lot of this music coming out of Haight-Ashbury was very experimental. You would have a lot more jamming and instrumentation, a lot more guitar solos, and you would also hear rock music mixed with blues and country, with the Grateful Dead and another Bay Area band, Creedence Clearwater Revival, being the two that really popularized mixing rock music with country. And you might not think of San Francisco as being a country or bluegrass type of town, but a lot of the hippie scene is associated with country and bluegrass. The city is home to the Hardly Strictly Bluegrass Festival. This is a giant, multi-stage, multi-day festival that takes place in Golden Gate Park every year. Hundreds of thousands of people show up to this festival, and it's completely free. I've been to it twice, and it's a fantastic experience. And it's just fun just to walk around and take in all kinds of great music. And as the name implies, it isn't just bluegrass. There's a lot of bluegrass, but there's a lot of other stuff as well. But overall, San Francisco is just a really fun city, and I can see why it's a popular spot for millennials and younger folks to want to move to. It's just a great city for walking around, being healthy and active, a lot of great restaurants, a lot of great music, and it's never hot and it's never cold. If you've never been there and you're basing your opinions of the city off of what the media has said about it, then you might be very surprised about what the city is actually like. So check it out. There's nowhere else like it in the U.S. So those are some of the major aspects about San Francisco that I wanted to discuss in this video. It's one of my favorite big cities in the country, and I love visiting there. It would drive me crazy to live there, but if you like visiting big cities and you haven't been there, do yourself a favor and visit San Francisco. You will have a great time. There are many types of urban experiences you can have there that you can't have anywhere else in the U.S. So despite the hate from the media, it's a great city. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up to let me know you approve, and subscribe to this channel if you're interested in learning more about U.S. geography. I'm talking about cities and counties and states and ranking them in all kinds of different categories, talking about cross-country road tripping, and everything I talk about comes from a little more nerdy type perspective. But yeah, thanks for watching. Geography King, signing out.